Over the past few months, the Trump administration has cut billions of dollars of federal funding to various universities. Particularly hard hit have been the elite, so-called Ivy League universities, which have historically received a disproportionate amount of government funding. Trump's targeting of Ivy League universities is not particularly surprising. University campuses have long been a hotbed of left-wing political activism, which Trump and many of his supporters despise. These tensions have intensified over the past 2 years, as many students protest about the situation in the Middle East. But it's not just about politics. We're talking about federal funding for private universities, so we of course need to talk about money. In January of 2024, the Republican-led House Budget Committee released a report titled "Private Universities Pocket Billions a Year in Taxpayer Cash While Condoning Anti-Semitism on College Campuses." Issues related to anti-Semitism on college campuses are beyond the scope of this channel, but the committee does make some interesting points about economics. The top 10 private universities in the U.S. have collectively received $33 billion of government grants over the past 5 years. They've also avoided $12 billion of capital gains taxes as their endowments are tax-exempt. Thus, total government support and tax breaks add up to $45 billion over 5 years. These universities collectively possess endowments worth $237 billion. Given that these universities already have so much money, why do they need even more from the taxpayers? One of these Ivy League universities is Princeton. The reason we're picking out Princeton is because they recently announced a series of budget cuts and layoffs, which they directly blame on a reduction in federal funding. Princeton charges over $60,000 per year for undergraduate tuition and has an endowment of $34 billion. Do they really need government money? In this video, we'll delve into the complex topic of university finances and assess the likely impact of Trump's recent funding cuts. Princeton is a private, non-profit entity. It can make profits and losses just like any other business, but because it's a non-profit, it does not have shareholders to distribute profits to. Any profits that are made accumulate in the university's endowment, which is basically a big pot of money that can be used to fund its operating costs in the future. Princeton has 4 main sources of revenue. Firstly, tuition is paid by their students. Second is government grants tied to research projects. Third is donations made by private individuals, mostly alumni. And finally, they make profits by investing their endowment into the stock market or other assets. Princeton incurs costs related to both its education and research activities. They have to pay their professors and other faculty members. They have to maintain their buildings and other general operating costs. They pay stipends to PhD students. While undergraduate and master's students generally pay to attend university, PhD students generally get paid to attend. In return, they conduct research or act as teaching assistants on behalf of the university. Princeton incurs significant costs to conduct research. This includes paying the salaries of professors and postdoctoral research fellows, as well as maintaining their research labs. Currently, the cost of undergraduate tuition at Princeton is $63,000. Between 2015 and 2024, the tuition price has increased 44%. During this same period, the general rate of consumer price inflation in the United States was 32%, so the tuition price has increased significantly faster than inflation. However, Princeton's tuition revenue has not increased nearly as quickly. In 2015, Princeton made $110 million from tuition. By 2024, this had increased to $137 million. Even as the tuition price increased 44%, tuition revenue only increased 24%. In fact, Princeton's tuition revenue has increased at a slower rate than inflation. After adjusting for inflation, they generate less money from tuition today than they did a decade ago. Princeton gives need-based scholarships to their students. Starting in 2023, any student who comes from a family with a household income less than $100,000 gets their tuition completely waived. Increasingly generous aid programs offset the price hikes. If all students paid full price, Princeton would have generated $512 million from tuition in 2024. But because so many students qualified for financial aid, they only made $137 million. Tuition revenue alone is not nearly enough to cover Princeton's operating costs and only represents a small minority of their revenue. In 2024, Princeton generated approximately $900 million of total revenue. This included $137 million from tuition, $456 million from government grants, $166 million from private donations, $83 million from auxiliary services such as room and board, and $53 million from other sources. Over half of their revenue comes from government grant.
Kraken, there are a lot of things that we do for our clients, a lot of things that we have in place that safeguard those funds. One is these long, complex passwords that you can choose. You also have the ability to approve new
government grants. Now let's look at their expenses. In 2024, they spent $1.4 billion on salaries and employee benefits, $546 million on supplies, services, and other, $97 million on occupancy costs. This includes maintenance, utilities, and property taxes on their buildings, $104 million in stipends paid to PhD students, $210 million on depreciation of their buildings. Finally, they also have $5.4 billion of outstanding loans, which incurred interest expense of $133 million. Their total expenses added up to approximately $2.5 billion, which is more than double their revenue. They incurred a loss for the year of approximately $1.6 billion. Princeton loses money every year, and the losses are accelerating. They've lost more than $1 billion in every one of the past 5 years. So why does Princeton lose so much money? Why does it cost so much to run a university? Their biggest expense by far is personnel. Princeton has 8,100 employees, of which 1,315, or only 16%, are faculty. The vast majority of their staff are either administrative or postdocs and other researchers. The average Princeton employee gets paid approximately $130,000 per year, plus $30,000 worth of benefits such as healthcare and pension. Princeton is able to fund its losses by tapping into its endowment. As of June 30th, 2024, their endowment was worth $34 billion. Princeton's fiscal year ends on June 30th. Princeton invests its portfolio primarily in equity securities. Of their $34 billion portfolio, $3.5 billion is invested in developed market equities, $2.6 billion in emerging market equities, $8.7 billion in something they call independent return. Independent return refers to hedge funds which can pursue a broad range of investment strategies. $14 billion is invested in private equity funds. $3.6 billion is invested in real assets. This includes things like real estate and farmland. A minimal amount is invested in fixed income, and $1.3 billion is sitting in cash. Over the past decade, Princeton's endowment fund has yielded investment returns of 107%, representing an annualized rate of 7.6% per year. During this same period, the S&P 500 has increased 182%, representing an annualized rate of 11%. Prior to 2020, Princeton's endowment returns were almost identical to the S&P 500. Over the past 4 years, they have significantly underperformed the S&P 500. Princeton should not be faulted too much for this underperformance. Over the past 5 years, the S&P 500 has performed unusually well, massively outperforming European and emerging market stocks. This outperformance has been driven by a handful of mega-cap tech stocks. We should thus not be overly critical of Princeton's recent underperformance. If you'd invested in almost any asset class other than the S&P 500 over the past 5 years, you would have underperformed. The investment returns from the endowment are necessary to fund the university's operating losses. Each year, Princeton withdraws about $1 billion from its endowment for this purpose. In 2024, they had to withdraw $1.4 billion. Of course, the investment returns are volatile from year to year, based on market conditions, but in the long run, they need to make significantly positive investment returns. Currently, their endowment is worth $34 billion. If we assume they continue to make 7.6% annual returns, they can expect to make $2.6 billion of annual investment gains on average going forward. This is more than enough to cover their operating losses. On the surface, Princeton's financial position looks very good, but there is one major complication. The majority of the money in the endowment originally comes from private donors. These donors include both Princeton alumni and rich people who want to donate to the university for whatever reason. These donations often come with restrictions as to what the money can be spent on. For example, in 2001, a Princeton alumni and insurance mogul named Peter Lewis donated $60 million to the university. He specified that this money can only be used to build a new library named after him. In 2008, the Lewis Library was completed. Donors can specify that their money can only be spent on scholarships for specific students. Maybe you want to provide scholarships specifically for students who major in engineering. Maybe you want to donate money that can only be spent on cancer research. When restricted donor money is invested into the endowment, the investment gains associated with that money is also subject to those same restrictions. Of the $34 billion in Princeton's endowment, $20 billion is subject to donor restrictions. Only $14 billion is unrestricted. In April of 2025, the Trump administration froze certain federal grants to a number of Ivy League universities. Princeton in particular had $210 million worth of research grants frozen. These include grants from NASA and the Department of Defense. This is a big blow for Princeton. In 2024, they generated approximately $900 million of total revenue, so this funding freeze will cut their revenue by almost a quarter. U.S. government agencies have long given research grants to universities. For example, the Defense Department may give a grant to fund the research of new types of materials. This research may have military applications or may benefit society at large. Some of this funding goes to paying the salaries of the postdocs working on the research or other laboratory expenses. However, as much as 40% of grant money can go to universities' administrative overhead. The various accountants, human resources, and other employees at the university who are not directly involved in research. Princeton used to have something they call Winter Session. It's a 2-week program during the winter break where undergraduate students can participate in some community building activities. At Winter Session, the students don't learn anything, nor do they conduct any research. Its purpose is to improve the students' sense of belonging and mental health. As a result of the recently announced freeze in federal funding, Princeton was forced to cut costs. As part of the cost cuts, they are discontinuing Winter Session. This seems a bit strange. Their funding from NASA and the Department of Defense was frozen. This money should never have gone to Winter Session in the first place. So why are they discontinuing Winter Session as a result? Remember that in addition to paying the direct cost of the research, part of the government grants are allocated to administrative overhead. Even if these research projects are canceled, the overhead still needs to be paid for. Money is fungible. The money that used to go to funding Winter Session is now being diverted to cover the shortfall. As an outside observer, it's very difficult to say whether the government grant money is being spent efficiently. But the fact that they waste money on things as useless as Winter Session suggests there is indeed a lot of fat to be cut. Trump's recent funding freezes will serve as an impetus for elite universities to tighten their belts and reduce wasteful spending. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. Do you think the government should give grants to private universities? Let us know in the comments section below. As always,
With Robinhood Gold, you can earn a 4% APY with your uninvested cash. Sign up today.
Hello, coconut scent. Hello, deodorant makes every day yay.
As a lot of you guys know, one of the things I like to do here on the channel is keep tabs on the 13F filings of the best investors in the world. These are quarterly SEC filings that big money managers have to submit that show their stock holdings. It's kind of like an investing cheat code. Every 3 months you get to see what the world's best investors have been buying and selling. And recently they have been very busy with some very notable names making some very big bets on some very notable companies. So in this video, I'm going to take you through all the biggest moves I think you should know from the most recent 13F filings. And we start with the granddaddy himself, Mr. Warren Buffett. Now, one of the most notable stories around Warren Buffett over the past year and a half has been his sell down of the Apple position, which really started in Q1 of 2024. Over the next 3 quarters, Buffett went on to sell over 605 million Apple shares, 2/3 of his position, reducing Apple's weight in the Berkshire portfolio from 50% to just 25%. Now, after this, he left himself with an even 300 million shares, and the next few quarters showed no further reduction. So we all thought that Buffett was done, right? Well, turns out that might not be the case, as in his most recent 13F filing, it shows that Berkshire has sold another 20 million shares, or another 6.67% of their Apple holding. Why? Well, that is the million-dollar question. Previously, Buffett has cited a few reasons for the sell down, including fears of an increase in the corporate tax rate, making him want to clear profits now. He also discussed his desire to want to hold more cash with all that's going on in the world. And lastly, there was also the simple explanation of Apple's valuation ballooning up to a PE multiple of around 38. But truth be told, this time, I'm not exactly sure why Buffett's making this move. I would say, it's probably just the valuation, and it could very well be. However, interestingly, Apple's stock has actually fallen versus where it was when Buffett was previously selling. Now, this is just my own speculation, but it could potentially be around the headwinds Apple potentially faces surrounding tariffs, as in Apple's Q2 earnings call, the last info Buffett would have gotten before making this reduction, Tim Cook did actually note that the tariff situation is going to cost Apple about $900 million per quarter. I can't say for sure, but maybe Buffett just saw this situation getting messier at the time and decided to cut a little bit. But then in other news, Berkshire also made a couple of purchases, buying into United Health. Yes, the very same United Health that had their CEO murdered late last year in protest of their exceptionally high rate of claim refusals, an estimated 1/3 of claims submitted. I mean, I guess that's a pretty great business model if you can effectively charge people an insurance premium and then never pay out, even when they do make a claim. But there has certainly been a lot of reputation damage for United Health over the past 9 months or so. Either way, that is a new $1.5 billion position in the Berkshire portfolio, and other notable moves from Buffett this quarter were a 4% reduction in Bank of America, a 3% increase in Chevron, and a 4% reduction in DaVita Healthcare. Then from there, moving on into the second big news story of the 13F filings, we have one of Charlie Munger's favorite investors, Li Lu, making a big new purchase, and that company being Pinduoduo. In the most recent quarter, Himalaya Capital bought a massive 4.6 million shares, a $482 million position, and this position has immediately taken second place in the portfolio behind Bank of America, occupying almost 18%. Well, technically, it's his third largest position because the Google investment is split across 2 different share classes. But make no mistake, this is a really big bet from the Chinese investor, buying into one of the big Chinese e-commerce players. So what is Pinduoduo? Well, they are a competitor to companies like JD and Alibaba, but their shtick is the group buying model. So users can get big discounts on the app if they invite friends or family to join a purchase together. So it's targeting really price sensitive shoppers, and it also brings a social element to the shopping experience too, as you work together for better prices. Then in terms of how they make their money, Pinduoduo primarily doesn't rely on taking a cut of each sale like in Amazon. Instead, its main revenue sources are advertising services where merchants pay to promote their products within the platform. But probably the main reason you've heard of Pinduoduo is because in 2022 they launched Temu, bringing the low-cost factory direct model to the whole world. So why does Li Lu like this one? Well, I'd imagine it's probably because of how they're trying to build a competitive advantage. In e-commerce, low-cost moats are everything, and beyond simply working on ways to give shoppers the lowest prices, they're also kind of building a network effect at the same time. The experience gets better the more your friends and family use it. You know, in this instance, the experience gets cheaper the more your friends and family use it. Notably though, in the most recent quarter, they did experience a decent drop with operating profit down 38% year over year. The CEO said they're making substantial investments in their platform ecosystem to support merchants and consumers amid rapid changes in the external environment, and that, quote, these investments weighed on short-term profitability. So hopefully for investors, this is a reasonably short-term decline, because if you annualize their most recent quarter's earnings per share, it gives you a PE ratio of 21 at the current time. But as of recording, the actual current PE using the earnings of the last 12 months is a very low 12.75. So I think from Li Lu's perspective, he is hoping these investments pay off in the long run and he can capture the long-term growth of this usually fast-growing e-commerce company. Okay, moving on into the third big news story this time around, and once again, Bill Ackman makes the list. This time, however, not for his investment in Uber, but for making a new investment in Apple.
Confidence is not a mindset, it's an achievement. In the GMC Sierra HD AT4X, get 5.
New investment in Amazon. Pershing Square bought about $1.3 billion worth of Amazon stock, which now represents their fourth largest position behind Uber, Brookfield, and Restaurant Brands International. And the position holds a very healthy 9.31% of the portfolio. Now, Pershing Square did first disclose this position back on an analyst call in May, so there's already been a lot of chatter and analysis about this investment online, but I thought I would cover it here nonetheless. And at the time, Bill Ackman was very excited about this investment. On the analyst call, he called Amazon a, quote, fantastic franchise, while noting Pershing Square was able to acquire the shares at, quote, an extremely attractive price. In fact, Bill was able to get in after the shares had fallen approximately 30% earlier this year, an investment that already would have paid major dividends as the company has almost completely rebounded, rising approximately 40% since. So you might be wondering, why did the shares dip so hard at the start of the year? Well, it was mostly down to short-term fear around the generative AI boom and also US tariffs. But these are not factors that particularly bothered Pershing Square. In fact, when talking about Amazon's cloud business, Ryan Israel, Pershing's CIO, said this was a uniquely attractive time as we felt the company would be able to work through any slowdown, adding that Amazon is well on its way to continuing to deliver more than 20% earnings per share growth. So they were very confident in the investment. And the best thing for Pershing Square is that in May, Andy Jassy, the Amazon CEO, came out and said that actually Amazon really isn't seeing any big impacts from the tariffs, like at all. This is what he said.
We haven't seen any attenuation of demand yet. To some extent, we've seen some heightened buying in certain categories that may indicate stocking up in advance of any potential tariff impact. We also have not seen the average selling price of retail items appreciably go up yet.
But it gets even better for Pershing Square because in Amazon's most recent earnings call from just a few weeks ago, Jassy reaffirmed that so far Amazon really have not seen any impact from the tariff environment.
Through the first half of the year, we haven't yet seen diminishing demand, nor prices meaningfully appreciating.
And this has led to a very strong rebound in the stock. As I mentioned, up around 40% since Ackman bought in. Now, that doesn't mean that Amazon can't be affected by tariffs going forward. Even Andy Jassy on the earnings call said as much, but it is a good sign for shareholders. And it's a good win so far for Bill Ackman. And with that said, the fourth big news story, the last one I'll cover in this video from the 13F filings this time around, is Seth Klarman doubling down on Google. The Baupost portfolio added nearly 27% to their Google stake, taking it now up to 11.36% of their portfolio, the largest position in the portfolio, worth $467 million. And I find this really interesting because at the same time, you've also seen investors like Li Lu selling Google recently. And as time goes on, there's started to become two stories with this company. On one hand, you have an exceptionally profitable company that has a massive monopoly in internet search and basically prints money from that search volume. And in the most recent quarter, we saw that business continue to thrive, with search revenue growing almost 12% year over year, with the Google Services business, which includes YouTube ads, Google Network advertising, subscriptions, platforms, and devices, generating $33 billion in profit. Then on top of that, they also have Google Cloud generating $2.8 billion in profit for the quarter, and all up, the business looks very tasty, pumping out $24 billion of free cash flow year to date. But then there's the other argument, the ChatGPT argument. Now, while it most certainly is not showing up in Google's financial results at the moment, there is a growing cluster of investors that are starting to doubt the strength of Google's long-term moat in internet search. Now, this is of course anecdotal, but these days, I personally do not use Google search very much anymore. I'm much more inclined to search using ChatGPT, and this is despite Google Gemini doing its best to do a similar thing for Google searches.
Life moves fast, so do we. Send money quickly with Remitly. Download the app today.
And this is despite Google Gemini doing its best to do a similar thing for Google searches. Why? Well, personally, I like that ChatGPT gives me an answer that gets me 90% of the way there without having to click on any links. I honestly prefer the model of having to pay a monthly fee for ChatGPT than having it be free but packed full of sponsored links. Now, as I said, I'm just one guy on the internet, and this is not at all being reflected in Google's financial performance. You know, the company is obviously rock solid, and it will likely be for decades to come. But there's no doubt that in the ChatGPT era, more investors are starting to really consider the strength of Google's long-term competitive advantage, at least in search. But of course, you get the other school of people, the Seth Klarmans of the world, that see it very differently. I mean, Google's PE is currently 22. Not too bad considering its ongoing growth and its unbelievably strong balance sheet. And I think for Seth Klarman, this is what he sees: a business with a $95 billion cash cushion that's making almost $63 billion in profit and $24 billion in free cash flow every 6 months, with a dominant and diversified advertising business and a cloud segment that's just on the up. And at a PE ratio of 22, Klarman clearly has been lapping up. And with that said, they are the 4 main stories coming out of the 13F filings this time around. Now, one thing I do just want to note though is that this video is in no way designed to imply a buy, hold, or sell recommendation on any of these businesses. I say this every time, but while it's great to see what the big investors of the world are up to, it is by no means a prescription for what we should be doing with our own portfolios. Think of it as an ideas list for future research. And then from there, the last thing I wanted to mention before I sign off is that the free 3-day investing workshop I'm hosting with Phil Town in Peachtree City, just outside Atlanta, this September, is fast approaching. Tickets are still available, so please get yourself along for the 3 days. It's going to be absolutely awesome. We have a whole bunch of activities planned, including a completely free private barbecue at Phil's house for all attendees. We're essentially just going to hang out and chat and eat food for an afternoon. It's going to be seriously awesome. So please, if you have not signed up already, get on it in the next few days. Organize your flights and your accommodation and get yourself to Peachtree City.
We just have confirmed the death of a Blackstone executive. Her name is Wesley LaPotner.
The Blackstone business executive was among the 4 people killed in Monday's shooting rampage in Midtown.
So if you scroll through the comments of these videos, you'll see that Wesley LaPotner's death wasn't mourned by anyone. So what exactly did this evil CEO do? After the 2020 crash, Blackstone and other PE firms started buying real estate around the Sunbelt states. And fast forward to today, and the average homes in previously affordable areas like Atlanta and Florida are, well, no longer affordable. But hold on, that makes zero sense. I thought private equity was providing high-level solutions to the housing crisis, or at least that's what the CNBC video would have you to believe.
We've invested $425 million of capital since we acquired Skytown. That shows up in lots of different ways.
So obviously I wasn't going to get answers from a gluck session for private equity, so I wanted to explore all sides to find out the truth about this housing crisis. But what I found goes beyond the rise of corporate landlords. Private equity has turned housing into a high-stakes bet that now millions of everyday people are playing in, and you have zero idea about it. And if the private equity game spreads to the entire U.S. housing market, well, I'll let you take a guess on what can happen next.
Infiltration of investors into the California housing market. And honestly, it shows no signs of slowing down.
If you give these guys money, they're going to fucking buy your mum's house. That is what they're going to do.
People can't afford homes anymore. And if the American dream means owning your own place, then that dream is a fantasy.
Your cat is a natural-born carnivore. Feed those wild instincts with more of the delicious real meat cats.
Yes, finally an ad I can stand behind.
So before we dive in, let me get the fear-mongering that you're probably thinking about out the way. No, this is not going to lead to another 2008-style global financial meltdown. But there are real stakes for you that go beyond you possibly never being able to own a home. And to understand this, you first need to see what private equity is actually doing in the housing market and why their business model might be a ticking time bomb. And to explore all sides, I wanted to bring on a vice president at a private equity real estate firm to say his piece.
I've been working on Wall Street since 2013, both on the investment side and obviously also in a residence side too.
You used to work at Blackstone, right? Or was it BlackRock?
I was at BlackRock. It was my first job out of college, and it was an amazing experience, but I wasn't on the real estate side then. Currently, I work at a real estate company where we buy and develop real estate. 80% of our portfolio is in housing across multifamily, senior housing, and manufactured housing.
I'm guessing also there's probably more money in private equity real estate, right?
Well, not right now. The market's been pretty tough because interest rates are so high. And on the other side, I'd say that real estate is more on the stagnant side.
So we'll come back to him, but first, let me explain to you how firms like Blackstone are making money as America's landlord. In my private equity video, I showed you how firms like Blackstone buy a bunch of companies using leveraged buyouts. And they're doing the same for real estate. So let's say as private equity, you can buy 1,000 homes for $100 million. Private equity will put like 20% of their own money and borrow the rest from banks, like JP Morgan. So once they own the homes, tenants obviously start moving in and ideally start paying rent every single month. But here's where it gets interesting. They then take those 1,000 homes generating $10 million per year, let's say, and bundle it into a bond to sell to investors worldwide. And what happens next is pension funds, wealthy individuals, and now even universities start buying a slice of this bond to get monthly payouts from the rent plus interest. I'll get to all that later. But anyways, these are called rental-backed securities. And your rent payment just became a part of a global financial product. Then the cycle continues where private equity uses that money to buy up more homes. And just like when they buy up a bunch of companies, they borrow a bunch of money so they can buy a bunch of these homes faster. And just like with companies, if home values or rents start going up, so do their profits. But that's not even how they make the real money. So is it fair to say that you probably make the most from those performance fees?
I would say in a good market and your investments are doing well, performance fees are generally like where you will make a lot of money. But if the market's not doing very well, then the asset management fees will really keep the lights on and pay the salaries and things like that.
But the thing is, this performance fee only gets taxed 20% instead of the regular 37% income tax rate. And I'll also get into this later, but it's a loophole they fought hard to protect. So it's important you understand this to grasp the incentives at play here, because at scale, this now starts impacting entire neighborhoods. Because when private equity buys up a bunch of homes, they also are making bulk deals with home builders. And it's a big reason why all these corporate towns and luxury apartments all look the goddamn same. And also why they might start using smaller lot sizes and cheaper materials to maximize profit. But to be fair, I don't think many Americans really give a shit about beauty, but what everyone from any country gives a shit about is getting screwed on price. Because remember those damn fees? Well, private equity also passes down fees on top of rent to renters. Online payment fees, pet fees, admin fees, transaction fees. Like, look at all these bullshit ass fees on my own rent payments. But that's not all. Many large landlords use algorithmic pricing software like RealPage to set rent prices. In fact, there are ongoing lawsuits alleging this leads to price coordination between competing landlords.
Corporate landlords collude with each other to set artificially high rental prices.
But you might think, well, don't airlines do the same thing too? Yes, but it becomes a problem when private equity concentrates in a small area where now entire neighborhood prices get jacked up by algorithms setting these competing prices. Because even though private equity today only owns 4% of homes nationally, it's a different story when you look at this map. What you see is that it isn't spread evenly. It's concentrated in specific markets. Over half are in just 5 states: Florida, California, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas, where I live. Actually, I don't know if I should be revealing where I live, considering I just got hacked in my last video.
I think we have your apartment.
What?
The address.
Okay, prove it.
Does this look familiar to you?
What the fuck? Wait, what? That's literally where I'm sitting right now. But goddamn it, whatever. It's important for this video because where I live in Austin, private equity owns more than 25% of all apartments or multi-family homes. And when it comes to single-family homes in some Atlanta neighborhoods, Wall Street landlords own 1 out of every 5 houses.
Nationwide is more than you think. Yeah, their client-ready market updates make it easier for me to guide clients, giving me more.
One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch has managed the Fidelity Magellan Fund since 1977. His investment record has been spectacular. Time magazine called him the #1 money manager in America, and Fortune said he is the most successful in his field in the 1980s, a superstar investor. If you had invested $10,000 in 1977 when Peter Lynch became manager of the fund, your investment would be worth $240,000 as of mid-1989. In this program, a Simon & Schuster presentation, Peter Lynch explains how individual investors can learn about potentially successful companies long before the Wall Street analysts do. This jump on the experts is what can produce a 10-bagger, a stock that appreciates tenfold or more, the stock that turns an average portfolio into a star performer. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting out, Peter Lynch will help you to pick out winning stocks. Who knows? A 10-bagger may be right around the corner.
At this point, I'm supposed to promise I'll share the secrets of my success as a professional stock market investor. But rule number 1 is stop listening to professionals. 20 years in this business has convinced me that any normal person, using the customary 3% of his or her brain power, can pick stocks as well, if not better, than the average Wall Street expert. I know you don't expect the plastic surgeon to advise you to do your own facelift. You don't want the plumber to tell you to install your own hot water tank. But this isn't surgery or plumbing. This is investing, where the smart money isn't so smart and the dumb money isn't so dumb. Dumb money is only dumb when it listens to the smart money. In fact, the amateur investor has many built-in advantages that can result in outperforming the experts. When you pick your own stocks, you should outperform the experts. Otherwise, why bother? Once you've decided to invest individually, try going it alone. This means ignoring the hot tips, recommendations from brokerage houses, and the latest can't-miss suggestion from your favorite newsletter. It also means you should ignore the stocks you hear Peter Lynch or some similar authority is buying. You've got better sources than Peter Lynch, and they're all around you. What makes your sources so good is that you can keep tabs on them. You can pick spectacular performers from your place of business or out of your neighborhood shopping mall long before Wall Street will find them. It's impossible to be a credit card carrying American consumer while having done a lot of fundamental analysis on dozens of companies. This is where you'll find the 10 baggers. I've seen it happen over and over from my perch at Fidelity. In the language of Wall Street, a 10 bagger is a stock in which you've made 10 times your money. I suspect this technical term has been borrowed from baseball, which goes up to a 4-bagger or a home run. In my business, a 4-bagger is nice, but a 10-bagger is a whole lot better. You might assume it's the sophisticated gossip that experts hear around Quotron machines which give us our best investment ideas. But I stumble onto the potential big winners in extracurricular situations the same way you can. For instance, I was impressed with the Taco Bell burrito on a trip to California. Somebody at the rival Holiday Inn told me about La Quinta motor inns. My family and friends drive Volvos. My kids had an Apple computer at home, and then the systems manager bought several for our office. I loved the coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. My wife recommended the revamped Pier 1 Imports. In fact, Carolyn is one of my best sources. She's the one who discovered Legs. Legs is the perfect example of the power of common knowledge. It turned out to be one of the most successful consumer products of the 70s. In the early part of that decade, I was working as a securities analyst at Fidelity. I knew the textile business. I visited textile plants, calculated profit margins, and learned the esoterica of warps and woofs. But none of this information was as valuable as Carolyn's. I didn't find Legs in any of my research. She found it by going to the grocery store. Carolyn didn't need to be a textile analyst to realize that Legs was a superior product. All she had to do was buy a pair and try them on. 2 or 3 years after the product was introduced, you could have walked into any one of thousands of supermarkets and realized this product was a bestseller. From there, it was easy enough to find out that Legs was made by Hanes, and Hanes was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Hanes turned out to be a 6-bagger before it was taken over by Consolidated Foods, which is now called Sara Lee. Legs still makes a lot of money for Sara Lee and has continued to grow consistently over the past decade. I'm convinced Hanes would have been a 50-bagger if it hadn't been bought out. You didn't have to know about Legs from the outset. You could have bought Hanes stock during the first, second, or third year after Legs went nationwide, and you could have tripled your money. The nice thing about investing in familiar companies like Legs or Dunkin' Donuts is that when you try on the stockings or sip the coffee, you're doing the kind of basic analysis Wall Street analysts are paid to do. Visiting stores and testing products is one of the critical elements of an analyst's job. During a lifetime of car buying, you develop a sense of what's good and what's bad. If you don't know about cars, you do know about something else. Why wait for the Merrill Lynch restaurant expert to recommend Dunkin' Donuts when you've already noticed 8 new franchises opening up in your area? The Merrill Lynch analyst isn't going to notice Dunkin' Donuts until the stock has gone from $2 to $10. You noticed it when the stock was at $2. For some reason, amateur investors usually don't consider eating donuts a sophisticated initial investigation into equities. People seem more comfortable investing in something they know nothing about. There seems to be an unwritten rule on Wall Street. If you don't understand it, put your life savings into it. Shun the enterprise around the corner, which can be observed, and seek out the one making an incomprehensible product. Does this mean I think you should buy shares in every business with a hot product? The answer is no. Finding the promising company is the first step. The next step is doing the research. The Fidelity Magellan Mutual Fund has risen over 24-fold per share during the last 12 years. This is partly due to some of the little-known, out-of-favor stocks I've discovered and researched on my own. Any investor can benefit from the same tactics. It doesn't take much to outsmart the smart money, which, as I've said, isn't always so smart.
Before you think about buying stocks, you should answer some basic questions about the market. How much do you trust corporate America? Do you need to invest in stocks? What do you expect to get from them? Are you a short-term or a long-term investor? How will you react to sudden price drops? Do you believe stocks are riskier than bonds? It's best to define your objectives and clarify your attitudes before you begin investing. You are a potential market victim if you're undecided and lack conviction. Personal preparation is as important as research when it comes to separating the successful stock picker from the chronic loser. In this section called Preparing to Invest, Peter Lynch will tell you what you're up against and how you can best ensure your own success. Chapter 1, The Making of a Stock Picker.
What if you could earn money while just living your life? With Moomoo, you can earn 8.1% APY on your idle cash, earn money while catching up on sleep, earn money while celebrating the holidays, or celebrate
of a stock picker.
There's no such thing as a hereditary knack for picking stocks. Many would like to blame their losses on a genetic flaw. They believe others are somehow born to invest. My own history refutes that idea. There was no ticker tape above my cradle, and I didn't teethe on the stock pages. Most of my relatives distrusted the stock market. My mother was the youngest of 7 children, and my aunts and uncles reached adulthood during the Great Depression. They had first-hand knowledge of the crash of 1929. Distrust of stocks was the prevailing American attitude throughout the 1950s and into the 1960s. During that time, the market tripled and then doubled again. This period was truly the greatest bull market in history, not the 1980s. My father died when I was 10 and my mother had to go to work. I wanted to help out, so I got a part-time job as a caddy. I began to understand the more important aspects of caddying when I was in high school. My clients were the presidents and CEOs of major corporations including Gillette, Polaroid, and more to the point, Fidelity. In helping D. George Sullivan find his ball, I was helping myself to find a career. The golf course was the next best thing to being on the floor of a major exchange. After my clients sliced the drive, they would enthusiastically describe their latest investment. The happy stories I heard on the fairways made me rethink the family position that the stock market was a place to lose money. Many of my clients seemed to be making money in the stock market. I continued to caddy throughout high school and into college. I was on the liberal arts side of Boston College, avoiding all the required math and accounting courses, the normal preparations for business. Instead, I studied metaphysics, logic, and philosophy, along with history, psychology, and political science. Investing in stocks is an art, not a science. People trained to rigidly quantify everything are at a disadvantage. If stock picking could be quantified, you could rent time on the nearest great computer and make a fortune. But it doesn't work that way. I applied for a summer job at Fidelity during my senior year. This was at Mr. Sullivan's suggestion, Fidelity's president for whom I had caddied. I was thrilled to be hired at Fidelity. Some interns like me were put to work researching companies and writing reports just like the regular analysts. The whole business was suddenly demystified. Even a liberal arts major can analyze a stock. I went to Wharton after that interlude at Fidelity more skeptical than ever about the value of academic stock market theory. It seemed to me that most of what I was learning at Wharton could only help you fail in the investment business. I studied statistics, advanced calculus, and quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis taught me that the things I saw happening at Fidelity couldn't really be happening. It was also obvious that the Wharton professors who believe in academic theories weren't doing nearly as well as my new colleagues at Fidelity. So I cast my lot with the practitioners, and my distrust of theorizers continues to this day. After serving my ROTC required 2-year hitch in the Army, I rejoined Fidelity as a research analyst in 1969. I was promoted to Director of Research in 1974, and in May 1977, I took over the Fidelity Magellan Fund. Fidelity Magellan had $20 million in assets and 40 stocks in the portfolio. My boss suggested I reduce the number to 25. I listened politely and raised the number to 60. 6 months later to 100. Soon after that to 150 stocks. I didn't do it to be contrary. I did it because I couldn't resist buying a bargain. There were bargains everywhere in those days. My portfolio continued to grow. Instead of settling for a couple of savings and loans, I bought them across the board after determining each was a promising investment. It wasn't enough for me to invest in one convenience store. I just had to buy Circle K, National Convenience, Shop and Go, and Hoppin' Foods, to mention a few. Pretty soon I became known as the Will Rogers of equities, a man who never saw a stock he didn't like. Since I own 1,400 now, I guess they have a point. Actually, Will Rogers may have offered the best bit of advice about stocks. He said, "Don't gamble. Take all your savings and buy some good stock, and hold it till it goes up, then sell it. If it don't go up, don't buy it."
Chapter 2, The Wall Street Oxymorons.
To the list of famous oxymorons, which includes military intelligence, learned professor, deafening silence, and jumbo shrimp, I'd add professional investing. It's important to view the profession with skepticism. Since 70% of the shares in major companies are controlled by institutions, you're competing against oxymorons whenever you buy or sell stock. This is a lucky break for you. There are many cultural, legal, and social barriers limiting the professionals. Of course, not all professionals are oxymoronic. There are innovative fund managers who invest as they please, but the majority of the professional investors are hemmed in by the rules. The virtues of every spectacular stock I've found were so obvious that 99 out of 100 professionals would have wanted to add it to their portfolios. But for reasons I'm about to describe, they couldn't. There are simply too many obstacles between the professional investors and the 10 baggers. Take the Limited, for example. This company went public in 1969. Only one analyst followed the company for 5 years. A second analyst, Maggie Gilliam, noticed it in 1974. The first institution bought shares in the Limited in the summer of 1975 when there were 100 Limited stores open for business across the country. By 1979, 10 years after going public and having sustained a brilliant record, only 2 institutions had bought the stock. 400 Limited stores were doing a thriving business in 1981, and only 6 analysts were covering the company. When the stock hit its high of 9 in 1983, long-term investors were up 18-fold from 1979. The price fell to $5 a share in 1984. But the company was still doing well. Investors got another chance to buy in. As I'll explain later, if a stock is down but the fundamentals are good, it's best to hold on and better to buy more. It wasn't until 1985, with the stock back up to $15 a share, that analysts put the Limited on their buy lists. Aggressive institutional buying helped send the shares up to over $52, far beyond what the fundamentals justified. By then, there were more than 30 analysts on the trail. Many arrived just in time to see the Limited drop. Contrast the story of the Limited with the 56 brokerage analysts normally covering IBM. You haven't spent much time in Wall Street if you think the average Wall Street professional is looking for reasons to buy exciting stocks. The rare professional has the guts to buy into an unknown company. In fact, choosing between the chance to make a large profit on an unknown company and the assurance of losing a small amount on an established company, most fund managers jump at the established company. Success is one thing, but it's more important not to look bad if you fail. There's an unwritten rule on Wall Street which states, you'll never lose your job losing your client's money in IBM.
Trade crypto up to $20,000 a month with 0 fees on Kraken Plus.
Rule on Wall Street which states, you'll never lose your job losing your client's money in IBM. Whenever fund managers do decide to buy something exciting, they may be held back by rules and regulations. Some bank trust departments won't allow stock purchases in companies with unions. Others won't invest in specific industry groups. It's the Securities and Exchange Commission making up the rules if it's not the mutual fund. For instance, the SEC says a mutual fund like Fidelity Magellan cannot own more than 10% of the shares in any company. It also says we cannot invest more than 5% of the fund's assets in any one stock. These restrictions are well-intentioned. They protect against the fund putting all its eggs in one basket. They also protect against the fund taking over a company. But the secondary result is that the larger funds are forced to limit themselves to the very large 500 companies out of the over 10,000 companies that are publicly traded. Fidelity Magellan has continued to compete successfully. For this, I have to thank the fast-growing stocks, the turnaround opportunities, and the out-of-favor enterprises I've found. The stocks I try to buy are the very stocks traditional fund managers try to overlook. In other words, I continue to think like an amateur as frequently as possible. An individual investor doesn't have to operate like an institution. You've got an edge already. The 10 baggers come from beyond the boundaries of what's accepted on Wall Street. Great opportunities can be found in your neighborhood or workplace. Better yet, you can find them months or even years before the news reaches the professionals. Then again, maybe you shouldn't have anything to do with the stock market at all. This is an issue worth discussing, because the stock market demands conviction as surely as it victimizes the unconvinced.
Chapter 3. Is this gambling or what?
Many investors took refuge in bonds after the October 1987 crash. The issue of stocks versus bonds should be resolved up front, or it will come up at frantic moments, like when the stock market is dropping. Investing in bonds, money markets, or CDs are forms of investing in debt, for which one is paid interest. Traditionally, bonds were sold in large denominations, too large for the small investor. Bond funds were eventually invented. This made it possible for regular people to invest in debt along with the tycoons. Later, the money market fund liberated former passbook savers from the captivity of the banks. It's one thing to prefer stocks to a stodgy savings account yielding 5% forever. It's quite another to prefer them to a money market where the yields rise immediately if the interest rates go up. Stocks have paid off about 30 times better than treasury bills, in spite of crashes, depressions, wars, and recessions. There's a logical explanation for this. In stocks, you've got the company's growth on your side. You're a partner in a prosperous business. In bonds, you're nothing more than the nearest source of spare change. When you lend money to somebody, the best you can hope for is to get it back, plus interest. Unless you're a professional specializing in troubled companies and bankruptcies, the average person will never get a 10-bagger in a bond. Ah, yes, you say. But what about the risks? Aren't stocks riskier than bonds? Of course stocks are risky. Nowhere is it written that stocks owe you anything. Even blue-chip stocks held long-term can be risky. The point is, fortunes change. There's no assurance major companies won't become minor. There's no such thing as a can't-miss blue chip. Buy the right stocks at the wrong price at the wrong time, and you'll suffer great losses. Frankly, there's no way to separate investing from gambling when dealing with stocks and bonds. There is no absolute division between safe and risky places to store money. In the late 1920s, common stocks were finally considered prudent investments. This was exactly when the overvalued market made buying stocks more of a wager than an investment. Stocks have been embraced as investments or dismissed as gambles in circular fashion, usually at the wrong times. Remember, stocks are most likely to be accepted as prudent at the moment they are not. Once the risk is accepted, we can begin to separate gambling from investing by the skill and dedication of the participant. To the stock picker who rushes in and out of equities, an investment in stocks is no more reliable than betting on the prettiest horse. To me, an investment is simply a gamble in which you've managed to tilt the odds in your favor. It doesn't matter whether it's Atlantic City or the stock market. You can learn which companies are likely to grow and prosper by asking a few questions. Although you can never be certain what will happen, each new occurrence, such as a jump in earnings, will indicate your likelihood of success. People who succeed in the stock market accept periodic losses and unexpected occurrences. Calamitous drops don't scare them out of the game.
Imagine your team only bigger, much bigger. Imagine a dedicated solution center, expanding.
Unexpected occurrences. Calamitous drops don't scare them out of the game. If they've done the proper homework before investing in a company and suddenly it deteriorates, they accept it and look for the next company. They realize the stock market is not a pure science. If 7 out of 10 of my stocks perform as expected, I'm delighted. If 6 out of 10 of my stocks perform as expected, I'm thankful. Remember, 6 out of 10 is all it takes to produce an enviable record on Wall Street. The greatest advantage to investing in stocks is the incredible reward for being right. If one invests $1,000 in a stock and he or she is wrong, all you can lose is $1,000. But if you're right, you can make $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 over a long period of time. Clearly, the stock market can be a gamble worth taking, as long as you know how to play the game.
Chapter 4, Passing the Mirror Test.
If you find a stock that's a good investment, it doesn't mean you ought to own it. There's no point going any further until you've looked into the mirror. You should ask yourself 3 questions before you buy a share of anything. First, do I own a house? Second, do I need the money? And third, do I have the personal qualities that will bring me success in stocks? Whether stocks make good or bad investments depends more on your responses to these questions than anything you will ever read in the Wall Street Journal. You should consider buying a house before you invest any money in stocks. A house is the one good investment almost everyone manages to make, and it is a money maker 99 times out of 100. Houses, like stocks, are most likely to be profitable when they're held for a long period of time. Unlike stocks, houses are likely to be owned by the same person for a number of years. You're a good investor in houses because you know how to poke around from the attic to the basement asking questions. Before you make an offer on a house, you hire experts to search for termites, roof leaks, dry rot, rusty pipes, faulty wiring, and cracks in the foundation. It's no wonder people make money in the real estate market and lose money in the stock market. They spend months choosing their houses and only minutes choosing their stocks. This brings us to the second question. Do I need the money? Review your budget before you buy stocks. For instance, if you're going to pay for a child's college education in a few years, don't put that money into stocks. In this instance, even buying blue chip stocks is too risky to consider. These stocks are relatively predictable over 10 to 20 years. But as to whether they're going to be higher or lower in 2 to 3 years, well, you might as well flip a coin. Blue chips can fall and stay down for as long as 5 years. If you've invested in blue chips and the market hits a banana peel, well, your kid is going to go to night school. Maybe you're an older person living on a fixed income. Stay out of the stock market. There are lots of complicated formulas to figure out what percentage of your assets should be put into stocks. But mine is simple. It's the same for Wall Street as it is for the racetrack. Only invest when you can afford to lose without that loss having any effect on your daily life in the foreseeable future. The third question is the most important of the 3. The list of personal qualities necessary for success include patience, self-reliance, common sense, open-mindedness, detachment, persistence, humility, flexibility, a willingness to do independent research, an equal willingness to admit to mistakes, and the ability to ignore general panic. Finally, it's crucial to be able to resist your human nature and your gut feelings. It's the rare investor who doesn't secretly harbor the conviction that he or she has the knack for predicting stock prices. It's uncanny how often we feel most strongly that stocks are going up when the opposite occurs. It's not that investors and their advisors are chronically stupid or unperceptive. It is that by the time the signal is received, the message may have changed. When enough positive financial news filters down so investors feel confident about the short-term prospects, the economy is about to be hammered. The trick is to discipline yourself to ignore your gut feelings. Stand by your stocks as long as the fundamental story of the company hasn't changed. If you can't, your only hope for increasing your net worth may be to adopt J. Paul Getty's surefire formula for financial success. Rise early, work hard, strike oil.
Chapter 5. Is this a good market? Please don't ask.
Each time after I've given a speech, somebody asks me if we're in a good or bad market. For every person who wants to know if Goodyear Tire is a solid or attractively priced company, 4 more want to know if the bull is alive and kicking. I always tell them the only thing I know about predicting markets is that each time I'm promoted, the market goes down. As soon as those words are launched from my lips, somebody else asks me when I'm due for another promotion. Obviously, you don't have to predict the stock market to make money in stocks. I've sat at my Quotron through some of the worst drops, and I couldn't have foreseen them if my life depended on it. In the middle of the summer of 1987, I didn't warn anybody, least of all myself, about the imminent 1,000-point decline. I learned in graduate school that the market goes up 9% a year. Since then, it's never gone up 9% in a year. I've yet to find a reliable source to tell me how much it will go up or down. Another theory is that we have recessions every 5 years. It hasn't happened.
Confidence is not a mindset, it's an achievement. In the GMC Sierra 8.
Another theory is that we have recessions every 5 years. It hasn't happened. I've looked in the Constitution, and nowhere is it written that every 5th year we must have recession. I'd love to know when we're going into recession. Unfortunately, when Future Man comes to Boston, I'm always on the road. I'd be able to adjust my portfolio. Things are never clear until it's too late. We always seem to be preparing ourselves for the last thing that's happened. This penultimate preparedness is our way of making up for the fact we didn't see the last thing coming along in the first place. People began to worry the market was going to crash the day after the market crashed on October 19, 1987. It had crashed. We survived it, and now we were petrified there'd be a replay. Those who got out of the market to ensure they wouldn't be fooled the next time were fooled again as the market went up. I don't believe in predicting markets. I believe in buying great companies, especially undervalued or underappreciated companies. It doesn't matter where the Dow Jones Industrials average is. The market ought to be irrelevant. If I could convince you of this one thing, I feel this tape has done its job. I'd love to be able to predict markets and anticipate recessions. Since that's impossible, I'm satisfied to search out profitable companies. I've made money in lousy markets and lost money in great markets. Pick the right stocks and the market will take care of itself. I hope you'll remember the following points from this section on preparing to invest. Don't overestimate the skill and wisdom of professionals. Look for opportunities that haven't yet been discovered and certified by Wall Street. Invest in a house before you invest in a stock. Invest in companies, not in the stock market. Ignore short-term fluctuations. Large profits can be made in common stocks. Large losses can be made in common stocks. Predicting the economy is futile. Predicting the short-term direction of the stock market is futile. Long-term returns from stocks are relatively predictable and far superior to long-term returns from bonds. Common stocks aren't for everyone. The average person is exposed to interesting local companies and products years before the professional. Having an edge will help you make money in stocks.
This is the end of Side 1A. On Side 1B, Peter Lynch explains how to research the fundamentals of a company so that you too can pick out the winners. This section is about how to exploit an edge and develop the story on a company. The first step is to determine what kind of stock you're considering. 6 stock categories are discussed, including what you can expect to gain from each type. Developing the story requires some research. The importance of earnings to the eventual success or failure of a stock, how to monitor a company's progress, and how to evaluate the price-to-earnings ratio are elements of the story. Peter Lynch tells you how to develop the story and pick out the winners. Chapter 6, Stalking the 10-Bagger.
The best place to look for a 10-bagger is close to home. The shopping mall, wherever you work, are good places to begin. 10-baggers like Dunkin' Donuts and The Limited were apparent at hundreds of locations across the country. The women shopping at the local New Limited outlet had a chance to see the opportunity, research the company, and buy the stock long before Wall Street got its first clue. The average person comes across 2 or 3 likely prospects each year.
All along the retail and wholesale chains, people who make things, sell things, clean things, or analyze things encounter stock picking opportunities. If you receive a paycheck, Automatic Data Processing is a company which processes 9 million paychecks a week for 180,000 small and medium-sized companies. This was one of the all-time great stock buying opportunities. The company went public in 1961 and has increased earnings every year. Automatic Data Processing sounds like the sort of high-tech enterprise I advise against, but it's not a computer company. It uses computers to process paychecks. Users of technologies are beneficiaries of high-tech. As competition drives down computer prices, firms like Automatic Data Processing can buy cheaper equipment. This reduces their operating expenses and leads to greater profits. Who had an edge on Automatic Data Processing? The officers and employees of the 180,000 client firms could have known about its success. In fact, can't think of an equivalent opportunity in your life? Let's say you're retired. You live 10 miles from the nearest traffic light, grow your own food, and don't have a television set.
At Terminix, our local experts know the pests in your area best, so you never have to deal with this. Or this. Definitely not this.
Food, and don't have a television set. One day you have to go to the doctor because a country life has given you ulcers. This is the perfect introduction to SmithKline Beckman, the makers of Tagamet. Hundreds of doctors, thousands of patients, and millions of friends and relatives of patients heard about the wonder drug Tagamet. Pharmacists dispensing the pills and delivery boys delivering prescriptions also heard about the drug. Tagamet was a boon for the afflicted and a bonanza for the investor. These users and prescribers had a big lead on Wall Street. No doubt some of the oxymorons on Wall Street suffered from ulcers themselves, but SmithKline must not have been on their buy lists. From 1974 to 1976, the testing period for the drug, the price climbed from around $4 to $7. The stock sold for $11 in 1977 when the government approved Tagamet. From there, it shot up to $72 a share. Many people invest in the stock market in a manner similar to playing poker without looking at your cards. The edge is especially helpful when it comes to deciding when to buy shares in established companies. Let's say you own a Goodyear tire store. After 3 years of slow sales, you suddenly can't keep up with new orders. This is a strong signal to you that Goodyear may be on the rise as a stock. You already know Goodyear's new high-performance tire is the best in the market. You should call your broker and ask for the latest background information on the tire company. Don't wait for your broker to call you. When he calls, he'll want to tell you about a company like Wang Laboratories. What good is a Wang tip to you unless you work in a computer-related job? What do you know that thousands of other people don't know a lot better? If the answer is nothing, then you don't have an edge in Wang. If you sell, make, or distribute tires, you've got an edge in Goodyear. I could go on for the rest of this tape about the advantages of knowing the industry you are involved in. On top of that, there's the consumer's edge. Whichever edge applies to you can help you to develop your own stock detection system outside the Wall Street channels. Remember, if you wait to hear it from Wall Street, you'll get the news late.
Chapter 7. I've got it. I've got it. What is it?
However a stock has come to your attention, the discovery is not a buy signal. Just because Dunkin' Donuts is always crowded doesn't mean you should buy the stock. Not yet. What you've got so far is a lead to a story that must be developed. You should treat this lead as if it were an anonymous tip left mysteriously in your mailbox. Developing the story is not difficult. It only takes a couple of hours. This homework phase is as important to your success in stocks as your previous vow to ignore short-term market gyrations. It is possible to make money in stocks occasionally without doing any of the research, but why take unnecessary chances? Remember, investing without research is like playing stud poker and never looking at the cards.
Procter & Gamble is a good example of why you need to develop the story. Procter & Gamble makes Pampers. Pampers, like Legs, was one of the most profitable new products of the 1970s. Should you have rushed out to buy the stock on the strength of Pampers? No, not if you had begun to develop the story. In 5 minutes, you would have noticed that Procter & Gamble is a huge company. Pampers sales amount to a small part of the company's total earnings. Pampers made some difference to Procter & Gamble, but it was nothing like Legs did for a smaller company, Hanes. If you're considering a stock on the strength of a specific product, the first thing to find out is, what effect will the success of the product have on the company's bottom line? The size of a company has a great deal to do with what you can expect to get out of the stock. Specific products aside, big companies don't have big stock moves. You'll get your biggest moves in smaller companies. The first thing I do is establish the size of the company in relation to others in the industry. Then I place it into one of 6 general categories: slow grower, stalwart, fast grower, cyclical, asset play, or turnaround. These 6 categories cover all of the useful distinctions any investor has to make. Slow growers are usually large, mature companies. They are expected to grow slightly faster than the gross national product. You won't find a lot of 2 to 4% growers in my portfolio, because if companies aren't going anywhere fast, neither will the price of their stocks. Stalwarts are companies like Coca-Cola, Bristol-Myers, Procter & Gamble, and Colgate-Palmolive. These multi-billion-dollar hulks are not agile climbers, but they're faster than slow growers. When you traffic in stalwarts, you're going to expect a 10 to 12% annual growth in earnings. In the market we've had since 1980, the stalwarts have been good, but not spectacular performers. If you own a stalwart like Colgate-Palmolive, the stock's gone up 50% in a year or two, you have to figure that's enough and think about selling. I always keep some stalwarts in my portfolio because they offer pretty good protection during recessions. Bristol-Myers went sideways during the 1981-82 period when the stock market fell apart.
Burgers for around $6.99 or Domino's $6.99 pizzas. Same price, more food, easy choice.
Acorns gives me something to look forward to. I can invest for my future, save for tomorrow, and spend smarter today, all in one app. See the potential.
Bristol-Myers went sideways during the 1981-82 period when the stock market fell apart. The fast growers are among my favorite investments. These are small, aggressive, new enterprises that grow at 20 to 25% a year. This is the land of the 10 to 100 baggers. Fast growers are high-risk investments, particularly the stocks of the younger companies, which tend to be overzealous and underfinanced. An underfinanced company with headaches usually winds up in Chapter 11. Fast growers are big winners in the stock market. I look for the ones with good balance sheets, making substantial profits. The trick is figuring out when they'll stop growing. A cyclical is a company whose sales and profits rise and fall with changes in the economy. In a growth industry, business keeps expanding. In a cyclical industry, it repeatedly expands and contracts. Autos, airlines, tire companies, steel companies, and chemical companies are cyclicals. They flourish when we're coming out of a recession and into a vigorous economy. The stock prices tend to rise much faster than the prices of the stalwarts. The cyclicals suffer when the economy is going the other way. You can lose more than 50% of your investment very quickly if you buy cyclicals in the wrong part of the economic cycle. Cyclicals are often lumped together with the trusty stalwarts because most are large, well-known companies. Since Ford is a blue chip, one might assume it will behave like Bristol-Myers, another blue chip. It doesn't. The common stock of Ford fluctuates wildly as the company loses billions of dollars in recessions and makes billions during periods of economic growth. Bristol-Myers' earnings will not go down in a recession. Ford's earnings could disappear. It's important to know that owning Ford is very different from owning Bristol-Myers. Turnaround candidates are battered companies. They aren't slow growers, they are no growers. They aren't cyclicals, they rebound. In fact, these companies may already be bankrupt. Turnaround companies are potential fatalities, like Chrysler. Chrysler was a cyclical that went so far down, people thought it would never come back up. Turnaround stocks can make up lost ground very quickly, as Chrysler has proven. An asset play is a company sitting on something valuable that you know about, but Wall Street is overlooked. The asset may be simple, like a pile of cash. Sometimes it's real estate. Pebble Beach was a great asset play. At the end of 1976, this stock was selling for $14.50 per share. There are 1.7 million shares outstanding, so the company was valued at only $25 million. Less than 3 years later, 20th Century Fox bought out Pebble Beach for $72 million, or $42.50 per share. After buying the company, 20th Century turned around and sold Pebble Beach's gravel pit, one of the company's many assets, for over $30 million. In other words, the gravel pit alone was worth more than what investors paid for the whole company in 1976. Companies don't stay in the same category forever. Fast growers lead exciting lives and then burn out. Sooner or later, they exhaust themselves and become slow growers and stalwarts. Some companies fall into two categories at once. Some, like Disney, have been in every major category. Putting stocks into categories is the first step to developing the story. You'll know what the story is supposed to be after you've correctly identified the category. The next step is filling in the details.
Chapter 8. The Perfect Stock. What a deal.
Getting the story is a lot easier if you understand the company's business. I'd rather invest in pantyhose than in fiber optics. The simpler it is, the better I like it. You never find the perfect risk-free company, the kind of stock I dream about. You can recognize favorable attributes which will greatly increase your likelihood of success. The following discussion covers 13 of the most favorable attributes you should look for. The first attribute is that the company name is dull, or even better, ridiculous. Automatic data processing is boring, but not quite as boring as Bob Evans Farms. But even Bob Evans Farms won't win the prize for the best name you could give a stock. Pep Boys, Manny Mo and Jack is the most promising name I've ever heard. It's better than dull, it's ridiculous. Who wants to put money in a company that sounds like the Three Stooges? No Wall Street analyst in his right mind would recommend a stock called Pep Boys, Manny Mo and Jack. Unless, of course, Wall Street already realizes how profitable it is. By the time Wall Street knows about it, the price is already up tenfold. Already up tenfold. The second attribute is the company does something dull. I'd love to find a company with a boring name that also does something boring. Crown Cork and Seal makes cans and bottle caps. What's duller than that? A company that does boring things is almost as good as a company with a boring name. Both together is terrific. Both together will keep the oxymorons away. Ultimately, the good news will compel them to buy in, and that always pushes the stock price higher and higher. The third attribute is that the company does something disagreeable. What's better than boring? The answer is boring and disgusting. A company that does something that makes people shrug, retch, or turn away in disgust is ideal. Take Safety-Kleen, for example. Safety-Kleen provides gas stations with a machine that washes greasy auto parts. Gas stations gladly pay for the service. What analyst would want to write about this? What portfolio manager would want to have Safety-Kleen on his buy list? Not many, which is precisely what's endearing about Safety-Kleen. The fourth attribute is that the company is a spin-off. Spin-offs of companies into separate freestanding entities often result in lucrative investments. Large parent companies do not want to spin off divisions just to watch them fail. A spin-off failure brings embarrassing publicity which reflects badly on the parent. Therefore, the spin-offs normally have strong balance sheets and are well prepared to succeed as independent entities. The greatest spin-offs of all were the Baby Bell companies created from the AT&T breakup. While the parent has been an uninspiring performer until recently, the average stock gain in the newly created companies was 114% from November 1983 to October 1988. When the dividends are added in, the return is more like 170%. This beats the total return of the market by more than twice. The fifth attribute is that institutions don't own it and the analysts don't follow it. If you find a stock with little or no institutional ownership, you found a potential winner. Find a company no analyst has visited, and you found a double winner. You can find these stocks in banks, savings and loans, and insurance companies. There are thousands of these opportunities, but Wall Street keeps up with less than 100. The sixth attribute is that there are negative rumors about the company, like it's involved with toxic waste and or the mafia. It's hard to think of a more perfect industry than waste management. Sewage and toxic waste dumps disturb people. Waste Management Inc., the largest company in the waste management industry, is a better prospect than Safety-Kleen because it has two unthinkable things going for it: the toxic waste industry itself and the mafia. Anybody who fantasizes that the mafia runs all the Italian restaurants, the newsstands, the dry cleaners, and the construction sites also thinks the mafia controls the garbage industry. This fantastic assertion was a great advantage to the earliest buyers of waste management stock. The shares were grossly underpriced relative to the actual opportunity. The seventh attribute is that there's something depressing about it. My all-time favorite in this category is Service Corp International, or SRV. Now, if there's anything Wall Street would rather ignore besides toxic waste, it's mortality. SRV does burials. SRV also pioneered the pre-need funeral policy. This is a popular layaway plan. It enables you to pay off your casket and funeral service now while you can afford it. SRV gets the money for its pre-need sales, and the cash continues to compound. This company was shunned by most professional investors. SRV executives had to beg the professionals to listen to their story. Here was the perfect opportunity. Everything was working. You could see it happening. The earnings kept increasing. There was rapid growth, almost no debt, and Wall Street turned the other way. The eighth attribute is that it's a company in a no-growth industry. Many people prefer to invest in a high-growth industry where there's a lot of sound and fury. Not me. I prefer to invest in no-growth industries like funerals. For every product in a hot industry, there are 1,000 recent graduates trying to figure out how to make it cheaper and better in Taiwan or